Mr. Chairman, we're live.
Thank you. We'll call this meeting to order. This is your Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions Committee meeting. And Matt, did you want to make your introduction first?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sitting to my right is Harvest Kinn. Harvest is a psychology major at the University of Wyoming and one of our legislative interns. She will be taking the role this afternoon, excuse me.
Thank you. As a psychology major, we'll want you to stick around afterwards for a little bit of help. All right, would you please take the roll?
This is roll call for House Corporations Committee. Representative Brown,
Present.
Representative Locke,
Present.
Representative Heft,
Here.
Representative Johnson,
Present.
Representative Lucas,
Present.
Representative Webb,
Here.
Representative Weber,
Here.
Representative Yin,
Excused.
Chairman Knapp.
Here. All right, welcome, everybody. Just a few housekeeping for decorum. Yeah, we'll speak through the chair as usual. Today we'll start with House Bill 127. Let me see if I got my order correct here. Oh, I'm sorry. Today we will start with Senate File 78 engrossed, distribution of unsolicited absentee ballot request forms. Do we have anyone here to present that bill? You're welcome to. Are you a co-signer on there?
You are.
Do you want to take over? Sure.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I guess you're the presenter today, so. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please proceed when you are ready. We are starting with Senate File 78, distribution of unsolicited absentee ballot request forms.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, I'm here today to present Senate File 78, prohibition on distribution of unsolicited ballot request forms. This is an act that relates to elections prohibiting a person from distributing unsolicited absentee ballot application forms to any qualified elector as specified and providing for an effective date, So in section 1, no person except a county clerk, the Secretary of State, or their designee shall distribute an absentee ballot request form to any qualified elector, unless that qualified elector specifically solicits an absentee ballot request form. For purpose of the subsection, absentee ballot request form includes any document that claims to be or that is deceptively similar to an official elections document, and that is provided to the qualified elector by mail, email, or any other means. And then we have the effective date. Pretty self-explanatory bill, but I will submit to questions from the committee.
Questions for Chairman Knapp? Representative Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair and Representative Knapp. So what happened to make this bill come about? Like, why are we doing this?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Weber, as with most of our election bills that we see coming forward this year, there are three tests for an election bill. One is to allow people to vote, number one, but the other's to a chain of custody. That's the second part, and the third is to be able to audit that. So this to me goes to the chain of custody, where if you want to vote absentee, that you yourself are requesting that from the clerk directly, and getting that ballot to you. There are many cases across the country where people will actually go out and canvass and get people absentee ballots to vote that were unsolicited. And then those votes come in, and sometimes nefariously. So that is my answer to this, is that it deals with that second level of that chain of custody of a vote.
Thank you.
Other questions for Chairman Knapp? I have a question. So just help me with a wording to make sure I think I read English, but I want to be sure. On the first page, it says, "No person except a county clerk, the Secretary of State, or their designee shall distribute an absentee ballot request form to any qualified elector unless that qualified elector specifically solicits an absentee ballot request form." Help me with that wording, because it says no person except these three, the county clerk, the Secretary of State, or their designee shall distribute an absentee ballot request form unless. So this unless, does that change who can distribute an absentee ballot? That threw me off a bit, and I just wanted clarification, if you don't mind. Chairman Knapp.
I don't think it changes, oh, Mr. Chairman, excuse me. I don't think it changes who would give that ballot out. I think it denotes more to the qualified elector specifically soliciting it. I could see where that word we may switch that to another word. I'll listen to testimony and then would be subject to a friendly amendment on that word.
Thank you, Chairman Knapp. Other questions for Chairman Knapp? Okay. So, next to speak, would the department like to speak?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Very excited to begin our work on Senate files and in the House side, and then House bills over on the Senate side. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and to my right is Joe Rubino, our General Counsel, Policy Advisor. He does a lot of stuff and does a great job. And really appreciate you having us today. I want to stand first in full support of Senate File 78, prohibition on distribution of unsolicited ballot forms. This is an old friend. We've heard it now 3 times, and I think we got a shot here to get it to the finish line this time. The origin, getting to some of the questions, and again, I stand in full support for the bill. The origin of the public concern and the need for this bill came largely out of the 2022 election, when the confidence in our elections was severely damaged, when Liz Cheney exploited Wyoming's existing statutes by sending out unsolicited absentee ballot request forms in a mass mailer campaign, while using official election language in the mailer. This mass mailing campaign prompted numerous phone calls and written complaints to the Secretary of State's office from outraged Wyomingites who called it misleading, disingenuous, and unlike anything Wyoming had seen in an election, and they were correct. Liz Cheney's behavior and the campaign's behavior was predatory and really outrageously wrong. And I know that countless Wyoming voters also contacted their county clerks to voice their complaints as well. And I think the outrage from concerned citizens across Wyoming was correct in that they don't want political campaigns to send out unsolicited absentee ballot request forms with official election language. And I don't think this conduct represents a Wyoming values where electors wish to be left alone, not be harassed through such formal sort of subterfuge in seeming to be a mailing from an official source that is not, and to make their decision on their own to request an absentee ballot request form on their own, if at all. That really is what was done in that 22 election was out of touch with those values. For this reason, I stand in support of this bill, which is aimed at prohibiting the unsolicited distribution of absentee ballot request forms unless specifically requested by an elector, ensuring that Wyoming voters maintain control of their access to absentee ballot request forms unless requested. So this language, we've worked a lot on it over the years, and there was definitely some issues we had on the first iteration and making sure the bill achieved the desired objective. We feel very strongly that we're in a really good position on this third iteration. And, in answering that question, I think, that first sentence is just, we played a role in working on that in addition to the drafter, that we just want to be very clear as to who the carve out is, not the carve out, but who can request it, which is the elector, the voter. But outside of that request, if they're not soliciting that, they're not going to receive one of these forms unless it's from the county clerk, the secretary of state, or their designees. And so, it's a little bill. I know it's, I guess, 2 sentences, but we've worked a lot on this language over the years and certainly open to any questions and understand we continue to refine it. But we just want to make sure we get it right in terms of the intent, because there was a form that didn't quite get there. And I think we've got it right now on that, in that respect. So thank you. I'm in full support of Senate File 78 and open for questions. Anything to add? Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Rubino, did you want, any questions for the Secretary of State? Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Gray, always a pleasure to see you, sir. So it says that a qualified elector must request the absentee ballot, but it doesn't say where. Can I get one of those on eBay, or do I have to request them from a specific place? I'm just pointing out there's something missing here.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lucas.
Secretary Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lucas, happy to work with you on that. We want to make sure, you start getting really long sentences and things start getting confusing. We want to be very, very clear. And so maybe we have another sentence on that. I'm not saying there isn't something that could be done to make that clearer, but happy to work with you on, if you want to do the amendment in committee, I'm happy to work with you on the spot here, but I also think we got 3 shots on the floor that I'm open to in either of those. But I would suggest doing another sentence. I get really nervous. One of the issues in the original forms of this is we were trying to put everything in like one sentence, and it just got really confusing and I think challenging for county attorneys. And I just want to make sure we're on the same page on interpretation of this if it passes.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll kind of go out of order here. We have Senator Hutchins. You arrived precisely when you mean to.
Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to present my bill before the committee. I probably wouldn't have presented it just that way. I tried to be very discreet about what happened, as you'll see on your handout, but it happened. And some people thought it was a form that they could fill out, and according to the county clerks, that it wasn't the appropriate thing to do. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to answer Representative Lucas's question. It's pretty clear that the application form should come from the Secretary of State or the county clerk's office. You can go online, it's super easy, click on the form, and it comes up and you can populate it and send in your ballot, absentee ballot request form. This bill is engrossed in that we fixed the title. The title wasn't appropriate, so we just fixed it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a really straightforward, to the point bill, and I hope you guys can all appreciate it and vote aye.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Any questions, Senator, or Representative Lucas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hutchings, I apologize. I meant no disrespect on that, but we do have voters who thought that an official write-in or absentee ballot was sent to them from somebody else. And so I think it could be clearer for folks who don't know where it should be coming from. And I do apologize, though, for being a smarty pants. That was not my intent.
Mr.
Senator?
Chairman, I took no offense. No, I'm talking about the way the bill was presented. I would have just done it a little bit differently. So no, I probably will never take any offense to anything you've said. But the ballots were sent and people mistook them for official ballots. In fact, it kind of told you to go ahead and send them in, ballot request forms. So this would just codify that, hey, if you want an absentee ballot request form, you're gonna go online, click, and get your form. Someone can say, hey, would you like a ballot request form? Here's how you get it. They can do all that, but we just can't send one to you before you ask for it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Any other questions? Vice Chairman Locke?
And I'm sorry, I'm actually, thank you, Senator Hutchins. I appreciate you bringing this bill, and I asked the question before you were here, so I'm sorry. And it is just related to, late in that first section, that phrase in there where it talks about, no person except the county clerk, the secretary of state, or their designee shall distribute an absentee ballot request form to any qualified elector unless. Is that wording clear? Is that clear for everybody? It was less clear for me, and that's why I brought that up, so.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, I think the good Secretary of State did mention that we'd worked on this language. This is the third time through. And we tried to make sure everything would be veto-proof. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Senator. We appreciate it. Are there any other agencies? Okay, any members of the public that wish to testify? Any organizations? And you can both come up together. We can draw straws to see who goes first. Please introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman and committee, I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. We've been involved, this is an old friend, as you've already heard from everyone else. We've been involved with this piece of legislation for this is its third go, so we're hoping it's lucky day to get adopted. We also, the only thing that we have, as you saw, is that we amended the title to the bill to make it clear that it was for absentee ballot request forms and not ballot forms. That's the only thing that we had to do, and that's there. I'd like to take a shot, though, Mr. Chairman, at responding to Representative Lucas's question.
Yes,
And
Ms. Langford.
possibly Representative Locke's question as well. Is that if you look in 22.9.104, there's a lot more statute that happens before you get to section E. That's the new inserted section. And that will explain to you that you request a ballot from the county clerk. So it will tell you that earlier on. And it will also, I think, take care of your question that the voter is requesting, using an absentee ballot request form to request an absentee ballot. I think that will clarify it for you. It's unfair when you just have a piece of the pie, right, that's thrown at you and you can't figure it out. But I think all of it is included in that whole section, and it will make that clear. So, and with that, Mr. Chairman and committee, I have nothing else to add. We're fine with this bill, and we'd really be glad to see it go.
All right, thank you for your clarification on those two questions too. All right, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Chairman Knapp, members of the committee, my name is Jeff Daugherty. I'm here today representing FGA Action. Just rising to speak briefly in favor of the bill before you. Mr. Chairman, I would tell you that whether any of us in this room agree or not, there is a crisis of confidence in public elections today. And I don't say that based on my own opinions. Matter of fact, I went to sources I don't ordinarily consult, like Pew Research. And even if you go to places like Pew, they will tell you that voter confidence is as low as it's been in my lifetime and going lower. This bill alone won't fix that. Matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, there are only about 15% of people out there in the public who think elections are going great. But there's 40 to 50% who either are somewhat concerned or very concerned with the way elections are going. And this bill in and of itself won't fix that, but what it is a step in the right direction. So I would tell you our founding fathers contemplated a lot in the crafting of our Constitution, but one thing they did not consider was a loss of confidence in elections, and I would urge this body to do everything you can to help restore that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
All right, any questions? Okay, thank you very much. And I think that's all the hands I saw in the room for testimony on this from the public. Online, I believe we have 2 individuals, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is. I'll admit one of them now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I've admitted Julie Freeze.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Committee. Julie Freese, Fremont County Clerk. So a couple things I wanted to add to what Mary had given to you. So even prior to the 2022 election, the parties had sent out one year a bunch of sort of absentee request forms. And I think that's why it's really important that the absentee request forms that each one of us as counties build, or the ones that are online from the Secretary of State's office, we all know that that's all the information required by statute that we need to actually do that. It was so confusing to voters to, some of them had actually asked for an absentee, then they were getting more absentee requests and they were calling saying, you know, I thought I already did this, what is this about? So it was really confusing to the voters. So we wanted to make sure that you're only getting your information from us or the Secretary of State. The other thing that might help also with the discussion is at the Senate corporations, there was some questions about from a candidate. So Senator Landon actually brought this up. He said, so as a candidate, if I'm going door to door, I can't just hand out a bunch of absentee request forms. And the discussion was, that's right, unless you came and said to a voter, you know, I'm running for election, and they go, geez, how do I vote? And they give them all the options. And then they go, I'd really like to vote absentee. You happen to have a form. That is the unless, is you could give the ballot application form to them. That would be the unless they ask you for it. So that would keep organizations from doing, they're trying to do drives, which they're not supposed to do. But if they even were just giving out information, they could have them there, but a person has to ask for them. They can't just start handing them out to people. When we do voter registration drives, I do always have them available. But again, even though I'm on the list, people would ask for those. I have them available for them. If that helps with the unless part of that.
All right, thank you. Oh, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? All right, thank you, Ms. Freeze. We appreciate your
Thank you.
testimony.
You betcha. Thanks.
All right, can you let, is it Ms. Serrano in?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I've admitted Antonio Serrano.
Mr. Serrano, welcome.
Good afternoon.
ready to receive your testimony. Why don't you introduce yourself and let us have it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Antonio Serrano. I'm the Advocacy Director for the ACLU of Wyoming. The ACLU of Wyoming opposes Senate File 78 because, to us, nothing is more sacred to our democracy than the right to vote. Voting should be something that is celebrated by our elected officials and encouraged, and this bill does the opposite. It is meant to make voting more difficult for Wyomingites and to vote, and it will allow for the chipping away at voting rights. Senate File 78 will discourage volunteers from organizations participating in get out the vote activities to distribute absentee ballot applications. With organizations like this providing services to senior students or people who are homebound, this bill prevents their work to ensure and expand access to the ballot to all Wyomingites. There are many folks who are committed to having every voice in Wyoming heard through their vote, but this bill wants to make that harder. Encouraging people in Wyoming to vote is a difficult job. Many people feel like their vote doesn't matter and they feel like lawmakers don't care. I believe this is reflected in the fact that 2/3 of Wyoming stayed home in the last election. Prohibiting assistance that provides access to the voting process to others limits participation for Wyoming's most vulnerable citizens. Senate File 78 not only undermines the essence of community support and civic culture, but it also obstructs the fundamental democratic process. Our elected officials should celebrate civic-minded people who help voters make their voice heard, not prohibit their insistence. So we ask you, please vote no on this bill. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. I stand for any questions.
Mr. Serrano, thank you as always for your testimony. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. All right. Matt, is that the last person online?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it was.
Okay. At this point, I will close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? There's a lot of movement over on this side. We'll say Representative Weber moved the bill. Second from Representative Lucas. All right. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, will you please poll the board on Senate File engrossed number 78?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a roll call vote on Senate File 78 engrossed. Distribution of unsolicited absentee ballot request forms. Representative Brown.
Aye.
Representative Locke.
Aye.
Representative Heft.
Aye.
Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Lucas.
Aye.
Representative Webb.
Aye.
Representative Weber.
Aye.
Representative Yin submitted an absentee vote of no. Chairman Knapp.
Aye.
Chairman, you have 8 ayes, 1 no.
By your vote, Senate File 78 engrossed. Distribution of unsolicited absentee ballot request forms does pass. One step closer. Thank you, Senator. Thank you. That's all right. All right. Next up, we will have Senate File 98, School Board Trustee Party Affiliation. Senator, welcome back, my old sensei.
Thank you, Mr.
Good,
Chairman.
good to have you.
Yeah, just a bit of a privilege. It is exciting to be here in front of the committee that I once chaired and to see my vice chairman sitting in the chairmanship. It all worked out very well. So I bring you Senate File 98, School Board Trustee Party Affiliation. I'll talk about the bill, what it does, and then I'll talk about some of the policy reasons on why I decided to bring this bill forward. But the bill itself is really straightforward. We go in and we amend one statute, 22-6-131. Well, primarily one statute. And what we do is we require that on a general election ballot, the political party affiliation of a candidate for school board be printed on the ballot. And then we allow rulemaking for the Secretary of State's office, promulgate any rules necessary to implement this section. And then 22-6-123 is just some conforming language to existing statute. And then the bill goes into effect on July 1st, 2025. So, Mr. Chairman, a couple of reasons why I think this bill is important. The first is clear voter alignment. Partisan labels help voters quickly identify candidates whose values and priorities align with their own political beliefs. I also believe that this will increase voter engagement. Partisan elections are more likely to increase voter turnout because we tap into political parties' efforts to get out the vote, to push candidates, etc. I also believe in policy clarity. Candidates in partisan elections have clear and transparent policy platforms. It makes it easier for voters to know where candidates stand on key issues, such as school funding or whatever you can imagine the issue might be. Mr. Chairman, opponents of this bill will attempt to make you believe that there really is such a thing as nonpartisan school board elections. And the reality is there isn't. The vast majority of candidates participating in school board elections are registered to vote as either a Republican or a Democrat. There are a few, I will grant you, that may register as an independent, but the vast majority of those representing our school boards have already selected a party affiliation. This bill doesn't change that. This bill creates transparency. All it does is move that party affiliation out into the open and put it on a ballot. So I would submit to you that school board elections are already partisan because the people who are on them are partisan themselves. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will take any questions on the bill.
Senator Olson, thank you. Are there any questions for the senator on this particular bill? Clear cut?
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
All right, we'll have the Secretary of State. Any comments on this bill?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. First, I want to say I stand fully in support of Senate File 98, School Board Trustees Party Affiliation. From a policy perspective, I've heard many constituents concerned with the issue of now being adequately informed about their candidates for school board. And as the committee knows, under existing Wyoming law, 22-6-123, school board trustees are on the nonpartisan ballot, and existing statute requires that no political party affiliations be listed on the nonpartisan ballot. This bill provides a transparent means by which voters can see the party affiliation of candidates for school board trustee, and I think it's really important that we have that transparency, so that's why I'm in support of the bill. This bill can be implemented, and our office would promulgate rules and regulations as required under the Senate file. Now, I did want to bring one issue up that we brought in the Senate that I'm not sure was fully resolved, and is the timing of what the political party affiliation is. So you take the 24 cycle, for example, and there were about 4 to 7 days where the filing period opens later than the filing period for the primary. And there were about 4 to 7 days, I can get you the exact number, where the crossover deadline, the crossover lockout had elapsed, and we were still in the filing period. So what I'm a little bit worried about, and I don't think the statute is clear on this, is somebody, the lockout has ended after the primary, they switch their affiliation, and then they can file for school board in that new affiliation. It also is a little bit unclear on what happens if somebody changes their affiliation after they file once the lockout is elapsed, but before the ballots are printed or before the list of names is certified. This is a county certification, not a state certification, because it's a local race. I think we need to make this clearer. And I think the answer is to just put in the bill that it's the affiliation that was in place when the lockout starts in May. And that's the affiliation we're going to use for the person on the ballot. I can get you some proposed language on that for committee of the whole. I've got, our counsel, we might have it here in a few moments, but I think, this is conceptual so far, but I think we need to resolve that issue, so we don't have ticky-tack things occurring and we have clarity. From a policy perspective, and obviously that's a decision for you to make, but in my opinion, that's something to resolve. And there's two aspects to it. One, what happens again, the issue once the lockout period ends, there is a period in time where filing is still open for this office, so somebody could switch. And then two, and there's the second issue is sort of a derivation of that. What is the affiliation we use if someone has switched? Is it the moment when they file their application? Is it the moment when the names are certified by the county clerk because it's a local race? Both of those are a little bit unclear. Now, there is rulemaking authority, but I think we should make it clear in the statute, especially the first issue, which I think really is a policy question. So very in support of the bill, very in support of Senate File 98, but I think we need to resolve this as it makes its way through the House.
All right, any other questions? No questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Secretary. All right, next up, any members of the public wishing to speak on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Kirk Schmidt. I live in Lander. I'm retired now, but for 38 years, I was a finance director for 3 different schools in K-12 public education. And you can imagine those 38 years, how many school board members, how many school elections that I've been through, how many people I dealt with. And it's just been very interesting listening to this debate. One of the things that I did talk to my local legislators about, because I was friends with some of them, I said, how come you've never come to a school board meeting? And their answer was, why would I want to come to a school board meeting? So I think it's always fascinating to me to watch legislators talk about school boards and how they act when you've never been there. It was a running joke. There was a trustee from another county in Wyoming who'd been on the school board for 40 years, and it was a running joke between he and I that you never saw a crowd at a school board meeting when they fired the math teacher. Volleyball coach, football coach, okay. And that has nothing to do with partisan politics. I've heard people in my own community talk about, well, we don't know what they stand for. And my question is, well, they had a public forum for school boards. Everybody was there. Did you go to the public forum and listen to them talk? No, they didn't. I have little sympathy for voters who are uninformed, who have not taken the initiative to go find out when the opportunities are there. In my career, it's been interesting to work with people who are Republicans and Democrats. And what was fascinating to me was I probably had more people who were Republicans that were more financially liberal, to the point where it got a little dicey on what they wanted to do. I actually had a conversation with a school board member. We were talking about salaries and benefits and what to do. And I said, if we keep going the way we're going, we're going to be broke. And his answer to me was, well, maybe that's what we need to do. I was sitting there, I was just shocked that someone would say that who claimed that they were supposedly a conservative Republican. The flip side, when I worked for the school district in Rollins, in Carbon One, we had a collective bargaining contract with the teachers. And it was in writing, it was collectively bargaining. The toughest school board members I ever saw on the management side were Democrats. So, I mean, it was just a philosophical point on their end where they stood. School boards aren't partisan. When you go to a forum and when you talk to school board candidates, the parents want to know what they're going to do for education. Are you running to fire a coach, or are you running to help improve our educational system in our local community. The people in Fremont One and Lander don't care what's happening in Casper or Cheyenne or Lusk or anything else. They want to know right there what's happening in Lander. They don't care what the flavor of the day politically, nationally, or even statewide. They want to know what you're going to do to help improve their kids' education, period. It has nothing to do with the partisan. The question that's been asked about the previous bills is really pertinent to this one. What's broken? What are we trying to fix? All the candidates for school board are on the general election, or in the general election. They're down ballot, so there's probably not people not showing up to election just because they don't know anything about the school board. They're there for everything on the upper side of the ballot. They're there. Every candidate that files for school board, as you know, there's no primary. So you can, and you look at the last election for sure, there were a ton of candidates in a lot of school districts. I mean, when you have 10 people running for 5 seats, there are hot topics in that community that people want to deal with. Whatever it is, that's what they're there for. They're there for nonpartisan issues, not partisan. Making somebody wear a brand isn't going to make a difference. And quite frankly, I think it ends up being more problematic because then you have the voters who are uninformed have a tendency to just vote for their party affiliation. And that's not necessarily a good thing. There are a lot of people that just go down and vote. And if you have candidates for school board and they don't know, they're better off not voting at all for a candidate than just going down checking the tick just because they are politically affiliated with what they think they want. And like I said, that political affiliation doesn't translate over to a school board. That's a whole different can of worms.
Mr. Schmidt, thank you for your testimony. Just in summary, I'm not going to make an assumption, but are you opposed or against or for this bill?
I'm opposed to this bill.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you very
Mr.
much.
Chairman.
Next up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Marguerite Herman here, strictly as not representing any group for myself, and speaking from 8 years on the Laramie County School District #1 Board of Trustees. And just real briefly, I think this bill is built on a false premise, which is that when people put an R, a D, or I or after their name, it determines everything they think about on any subject, and that you can predict how they'll be on any subject, and that they agree with everything on their party's platform. I mean, people are not monolithic like that in our state. There's a spectrum. There's always a spectrum, no matter what group you belong to. So that's the first thing that is sort of built on a false premise here. The other thing is that this will help people be adequately informed. And as Mr. Smith said, there's plenty of information out there, and you can call people and ask what they feel about the no-cut football policy, let's say, which Cheyenne schools have. You know, you sign up for a team, you're on. Is that wise or not? But that's, you know, you can ask people about that. I would have to say that people don't come in cookie cutter shapes. So there's that. But also, if you really want to get the endorsement of a particular party or a religion or whatever group you really think want to guide your thinking, there are endorsements given out by certain churches in Cheyenne, and the Republican Party had a slate of candidates they endorsed. So if that's what you wanted to guide, if you wanted a political party, if you wanted to vote in a partisan fashion, you could still do that because you could get the endorsement of the group that you felt affinity with. Let's see, and also, just getting down to the very basic of it, if you look at the top, the bill title has the word trustee in it. And all of you are run as partisan candidates, although there's a room for doing independent candidates. But being a representative, a delegate, in a representative kind of a situation is very different being a trustee. A trustee is a very different person making decisions, and it's based on the facts in front, not ideology. A trustee also, the core of a trustee is that you owe a duty. You have a trust to a beneficiary. And in schools, it's the children. It's always the children. If it's not the children, I would have to say, and sometimes our school board went astray and were serving other interests or other groups, and it always ended up badly. If you keep the children at the forefront, at the absolute top of anything you do, you can't go wrong. We disagreed even with that, but you can't go wrong. And so to insert this fealty to a group into a situation where you're supposed to be serving the children, and again, there's a lot of variety. It was a spectrum, and we disagreed and had great discussions, but it wasn't a partisan discussion. It was a discussion about what was best for the children, for their teachers, for the schools, for the curriculum, all that. And in a trustee, you have undivided loyalty. That's another principle of trust. And I think this injects, it takes things off that orientation. And so I would say the bill, although it says, it purports to make things transparent, I think it actually is misleading, because it means that if you vote for a person with an RD after the name, you can predict without fail, but they'll do it this way in that situation. And I think you do a disservice to the person who's running. And when you get in, a school districts are very complex, many moving, interlocking, interdependent parts. And to put them in a little pigeonhole and then hold them to that pigeonhole, doggone it, from now on, is really not serving them. It's not serving the district. It's not serving the children. And again, if what you want is to understand partisan, you can go for an endorsement or talk to them. And so I would urge you to not approve or to defeat the bill, simply because I think it injects partisan expectations, discipline, adherence, where it really is counterproductive to the point of the job. And so I'll just leave it at that. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Any questions from the committee? None? Okay, thank you. All right. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Jenny DeSaro with the Quality State Policy Center. Just to remind you, we are a nonpartisan coalition that has been operating in Wyoming for 30 years. It was founded by Wyomingites for Wyomingites, and we oppose this bill. We prefer that we keep our local elections as nonpartisan as possible. And my predecessors have said a lot of things that I was going to say, so I'm not going to be redundant. If you have further questions, I'm here.
All right, thank you, Ms. DeSaro. Any questions? Nope. All right, well, thank you for your testimony. Please introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Joey Carenti. I'm the Executive Director of Rural Wyoming Matters. We are an informational, educational advocacy group out of rural Wyoming. I want to start by apologizing either to you as representatives or to your candidates, or sorry, your voters who were somehow pigeonholed into voting a certain way because of a label next to your name or a brand. I've heard a lot of the testimony here that just is problematic with me, and I don't need anybody's sympathy for being uninformed. The members of this committee, I interviewed at least half of you during the primary. The other half, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about you. I didn't get that opportunity. I didn't take it. I'm sorry I missed some of your meetings. I don't know everything that this committee has done throughout the entire session here. I think there's a lot of false narratives. I think some of the things I've heard are emotional and ridiculous, and at the same time backed up with contradictions, like putting a brand by somebody's name won't make a difference. Well, if it won't make a difference, then why are you against it? It won't make a difference based on your testimony. I've heard people talk about in other testimony in front of this committee about increasing access, involvement, and information to voters. This does that. It's just a transparency bill. It doesn't change the school board election. Move it into the primary. Make it an actual partisan effort that you all have to go through at your level. It just says when that ballot is printed, it's gonna have this real basic information. And if you wanna be ignorant or misuse that, or have it inspire you when you get the early sample ballot before voting period opens, say, I didn't know that guy was a whatever party affiliation, and do some homework. I think it can only be a benefit. And the reason I'm really in favor of this bill is because it doesn't bring school board into the primary process. The statements earlier of the trustee is different than elected representative, I'm gonna disagree with that. Trustees, school board members, make policy. And I think when the people elect you to a position where you make policy, everything needs to be open, transparent, and it couldn't hurt to have the party affiliation in there. And there are other bills that are happening right now in the legislature about partisan, nonpartisan position, maybe at the county level. And that's the principle I apply. Your coroner doesn't make policy, so I don't care if that's partisan or not. But my county commissioners do. So I would ask that you think about in the equality state, when we're making policy, that it be partisan, as opposed to some of the testimony we heard earlier. And I don't like going here, but if the focus is to really serve the children and do what's best, and it's not a political position, and partisan politics shouldn't be coming into the schools, why do we already have partisan efforts happening in the schools where the children are being served by being transitioned behind their parents' back or arrested for not wearing a mask? This is a step towards transparency and accountability with our greatest and most precious resource in Wyoming, which is our children. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? I would argue with the coroner that sometimes dead people do vote. Not in Wyoming. Not in Wyoming. All right. Any questions? None? All right. Thank you for your testimony. Go ahead, Ms. Simmons.
Gail Simmons, Civics 307, and why vote? And I'll remind you that I will also answer to Doña Quixote. So most of the items that I was going to cover have already been covered. So, Mr. Chairman, I won't cover those. But I do want to point out the facts matter. So for many years, there was the whole switch in party affiliation, and they're switching here and they're switching back, and there's a gap, and they'll play the game and all that. And all that time, using actual voter data, I was pointing out that when people change party affiliation, they stay. They don't move over and go back, they stay. And I think that's important to remember because we actually can see that now in our voter rolls. So proposing that this somehow will make people be more clear about what their partisan values are is simply not borne out by facts or human nature. So the first thing, I'm not going to talk about nonpartisan tradition, I'm sure that somebody else will, or about politicization, but about the pressure to conform to the supermajority. We are currently 80.5% as of the primary election day registered as Republican. So the pressure for anybody who wants to serve in at least 21 of the 23 counties, regardless of what position they're interested in, to be registered early on and stay that way as that supermajority party is there. And that's human nature. So we may feel like the principles that we care about are critical. Most people, even in this state, are more interested in the person than the party. So this creates an artificial pressure that actually reduces ideological diversity. And if you think that that letter designates a person's view instead of talking to them and asking them, I think that that's very misleading. It also would discourage unaffiliated or minor party candidates. I want to talk about in Sheridan County, because in our largest school district, for 5 positions, we had 8 candidates. The Republican Party endorsed 4 of the 8. When the results were done, There were 5 successful candidates, only one of which had been endorsed by the Republican Party. And the point that I'm making is, when it comes to our schools, people don't care. They want to know what, as somebody pointed out earlier, are you there to fire a coach, or are you there because you're concerned that all of our children are given the best possible education? So the facts do not align with this idea that somehow or other, when it comes all the way down ballot and you are voting for, by the way, I'm on and against, since I didn't say that, Chairman. So it's just not borne out by facts or human nature. And then finally, party labels, as I said, offer minimal insights into the candidate's qualifications or specific views on education policy. Voters should evaluate school board candidates based on their experience, positions on local issues, and commitment to improving education, not a platform that was built by a series of committees, because they're making decisions just like you are, based on the facts that are in front of you. At least I hope so. And then finally, transparent forums, candidate questionnaires, and community engagement are more effective tools for voters to learn about candidates. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Brian Farmer. I'm the Executive Director of Wyoming School Boards Association, speaking in opposition to the bill. Mr. Chairman, in about 1650, we had a unique innovation in the United States, in the world really. 1650, the Massachusetts Bay Colony created the very first ever public school system in the world. Very first public school system, and they thought that it was important that that public school system be overseen by a board of selectmen. They thought that it was essential that the public had oversight of the public school system. Throughout that history, and indeed throughout the history of Wyoming, the vast majority of school boards have not been about partisan positions. Very rarely across the United States are school boards elected in a partisan fashion. Predominantly where that happens is in metropolitan areas. So it's not generally places like Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, my membership's against this for a few different reasons. One of them is that school board members are unelected positions. The other nonpartisan, they're unpaid positions. So the other nonpartisan unpaid positions are all without a party label. Any person that's an elected official that is not paid for their service in Wyoming is nonpartisan. This would make one exception to that rule. Also, I think that there's an unintended consequence of this, and that is there is a federal law known as the Hatch Act. And under the Hatch Act, it prohibits federal employees from running for partisan office. And so right now today, we have a number of folks that work for the federal government that serve as local school board members. And they would have to resign their positions if this law were to pass. So a federal law enforcement officer, individual who works with tribal entities on the Wind River, examples of those people that would have to resign their position because of this law. So, Mr. Chairman, I think the notions that the question of what does a school board deal with that is a partisan issue have come up. And Mr. Chairman, I was just involved with a school board meeting last night in Sweetwater County School District Number 2, that I spent some time with them. So here's just a few things from their agenda last night. Approval of bills, approval of financial documents and investments, approval of nutrition services report, approval of 1099 vendor report, approval of MOU for student teachers, a report on enrollment, consideration of certified contracts, a presentation on nutrition services, a consideration of bids for district camera replacement.
Mr. Farmer, how big is that list?
I'm not going through the whole list, but Mr. Chairman, I guess my point is that none of those are partisan issues. If you take a look at any school board agenda, the vast majority of what they're dealing with doesn't matter whether the person is Republican or Democrat. But the fact is that our school board members across Wyoming look like Wyoming. They are representative of Wyoming, and they're accountable to Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, I had the great pleasure of serving as an elected school board member in my history. I had over 10,000 people that voted for me in multiple elections. They were able to figure out whether or not I was representative of their interest, whether I had a party label with my name or not. Had I not met their interests, I would not have been reelected. That's how the game works. That's the same for for all of us. And so I guess the question that's been brought up is, so what does it hurt? What does it hurt if you have the label? The flip side of that coin is also true. What does it hurt if you don't have the label? Does the label really tell you about the person? If you want to say that the label tells you that this person is a good person, this person is the same as me, you have to look no further than your very own body to see that there are vast differences between people that affiliate with the same party. And so we do see things differently from time to time, and that's okay, and it is a part of our democratic process. It's a good part to put forward our best arguments and to represent our constituencies and to do our job to hold the office that is entrusted to us. And so school board members today are asking that they be allowed to continue to run in a nonpartisan office. They are those unpaid volunteer elected people who come forward to do the very best for their communities, dealing with agendas that have very little to do with any party platforms. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask you to consider voting no on this bill. Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Farmer,
Chairman.
thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? No questions? Thank you very much. So we're going to run short on time. We've got another bill that could get complicated. So you are from organizations, I'm assuming? No. Just here to speak on this issue? Okay. If you could limit your testimony to maybe what has not already been stated, but go ahead and introduce yourself and we'll hear your comments. Till that turns green,
Thank
yes.
you, thank you. Mike Hamill, Superintendent with Carbon County School District Number 1. And just as a point of information, not because it necessarily has anything to do with the bill, our district has improved more in relation to student achievement over the past decade than any other district in the state of Wyoming. I offer that also because I'm a Republican. I don't mind sharing that in this context, but I share that with everything I do at work has nothing to do with politics. There's not a single thing I do to help our kids learn more, to help them achieve more, to help provide a better environment for them, that is partisan in nature. I'd ask you to consider two simple things. What is the genesis of the bill? Why are we sitting here talking about it? What is the genesis of the bill, and is it educationally related? Number two, will the bill, if passed, advance educational interests in the state of Wyoming? And I think when you consider those two things, and you consider that what I offered before, I stand against the bill. It's not necessary. I do not think it will help education in our state. I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? No? All right, please introduce yourself. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Micah Richardson, and you've seen me in other capacities here, but I'm coming forward just as an individual. The concern I have with this bill that I don't believe has been brought forward is what it will do to those running. I think some of us, I happen to sit on the city council. I ran for that position because I love my community and because honestly, I didn't want to deal with the politics. And I think that's why a lot of people run for school board and city council, because you love your community, you love your school, you love your kiddos, you want to move forward just thinking about the topics and having those discussions on those topics rather than concerning yourselves with whether there's whatever name comes before me. So my concern is that it might, if this goes forward, just the nature of politics these days might decrease the number of people who would potentially run for this position because they know that they may have to get into kind of the RD kind of arguments that come up. And so I would just ask you to think about that as well. And that is all, and I would stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? All right, no questions. Thank you very much. Okay, and next I'd like to hear from the clerks on whether or not they could administer this. So Mary Langford, could you please come up and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon again, committee and Mr. Chairman. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. And I'm going to take you away from the policy discussion that you've been having and go to an administrative discussion. I believe you have in front of you several amendments. There are 3 that we'd like to propose to be included in this bill. The amendments are small. There's a lot of words on the 2 pages that I gave you. We can go over those quickly. The first part that has to do with 22-202A, this is the filing application for a school board member, and we would need to include in that just a portion that would say, and registered as a member of whatever party in that application, the new application, if this bill should pass. So we'd need to have that information so we can get it correct on the ballot. That's one amendment. The second one has to do with 22-6-117. And at the bottom of that, it lists out the order on the ballot of the offices as they appear. So this would add on here, and we have something that needs to be deleted. It's got community college trustees. Please delete that. We just want to add there the school board trustees. So cross that one out. Then the third edition would be 22-6-125, and same thing. This takes the the school board trustee position from the nonpartisan list of candidates, where we've already put it into the partisan candidates in the section before. And again, here it lists the community college trustees. Please delete that. We put this together pretty quickly this morning, but we wanted to make sure that we were able to have these things so that we could administer the bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman and committee, I'm happy to stand for any questions, but those are 3 administrative asks that we have, please.
All right, questions for Ms. Langford. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lanford, I'm just curious. This is a Senate bill. Was this proposed in the Senate, these amendments? And if so, why were they rejected? I'm just curious.
Ms. Langford.
I don't believe that they have been proposed until now. This is not an engrossed bill, I don't believe, no.
No,
Looking at the sponsor.
No, that was my question. Why? If they had looked.
It got
at
away
or
from
not.
us, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, other questions? Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, is there any other member of the public that would wish to testify? There's nobody online?
Mr. Chairman, no, there is not.
All right. With that, I will close testimony from the public. Committee, what's your pleasure? All right. Moved by Representative Weber, seconded by Representative Brown. Are there any amendments? Representative Weber.
Yes. I would like to move the amendments that Mary Langford brought forward on, we all have this in front of us. I know on the application, that would be something that, just as a, may I ask a clarifying question too? Would that be on the application that we would do that, or is that the application that the county clerks would make that change for the candidate to say, and registered as a member of such and such party?
Ms. Langford, I believe, if you could clarify that for the
Yeah.
amendment, please.
On number 1 of your amendments that you suggested for policy change, the wording "and registered as a member of a party," does that come from us, or does that is from us and you put that on your form for school board application?
Yes, this will be on the application
Okay,
form.
then,
The forms for application are prescribed by statute, so it'll
thank
be
you.
included in there.
Thank you, Ms.
Then,
Langford.
yes.
Follow up? Okay, so you're presenting this amendment as listed by the Clerks Association with the changes, correct?
Yeah, with the recommended changes.
Okay. Matt, are you clear with that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
All right. All right, it's been moved. Is there a second? Representative Lucas, we're voting on the amendment as presented by the Clerks Association. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no. That amendment carries. Any further amendments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My intent was to move all of the amendments that the county clerk had recommended. Some of them were in statute of 226117, order of listing offices in partisan elections to include school board trustees, and then in 226125 to delete the candidates from nonpartisan races.
And I assume that when you made that amendment, that it included
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
all the amendments. Is the committee okay with that? It included all. Okay, thank you. Any other amendments? Representative or Vice Chairman Locke?
Not a new amendment, but just for clarification on that amendment, and I wanted to make sure we captured this appropriately. Ms. Langford made it clear that on the amendment at the bottom of page 1, that we were striking out community college trustees. I wanted to make sure that was clear to everyone in the
That's
committee and make sure it was clear to Nat. Is that accurate, sir?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Locke, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just
Vice Chairman, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Any other amendments? Seeing none, we are voting on Senate File 98 as amended. Will you please poll the committee?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on Senate File 98, School Board Trustees, Party Affiliation. Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Locke?
Aye.
Representative Heft?
Aye.
Representative Johnson?
Aye.
Representative Lucas?
Aye.
Representative Webb?
Aye.
Representative Weber?
Aye.
Representative Yin submitted an absentee vote of no. Chairman Knapp?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 ayes, 1 no.
With that, Senate File number 98, School Board Trustees, Party Affiliation has passed the committee. Senator Olson, thank you. All right, next up, we have engrossed Senate File 127, Administrative Rules and Legislative Review, and we have Senator Boner. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's great to be here in front of House corporations. So I bring to you Senate File 127. This is a REINS-style act, REINS standing for Regulations of the Executive in Need of Scrutiny. And it's an effort to get a handle on the impact that our state agencies have on the private sector in the state. And so just to tell you a story, I think that we hear a lot about the amount of government services the average Wyomingite receives. I believe it's a little over $56,000 for a family of 4, with a very small individual tax burden to accompany it. And so often that is celebrated as a good thing. I'm not here to necessarily dispute that. I am asking the question, though, is there perhaps a drawback to having that much government in the state? In spite of all these services, in spite of the relatively low individual tax burden, we're still growing very slowly compared to other Western states who were becoming hubs for innovation and economic activity, and we're just not keeping up. So what this bill does is it establishes a process, or really modifies the current process that the legislature has for assessing the impact of administrative rules. Right now, this process is focused on Management Council. They get all the rules that are promulgated by executive branch agencies, and they can make a determination if it's not within the statutory requirements, if it's outside the law, basically, or if it's outside our intent. There is currently a process that we can engage in where we basically nullify the rule. And that's in Joint Rule 12-1, and it's been very rarely used, if ever. What this bill does in its current form is it highlights the economic impact that rules have on the private sector, which is the most important part. We're going to begin to analyze, think of it like a fiscal note for the private sector. We're pretty good about, have a very robust system for understanding the impact a piece of legislation, for example, has on government. This would do something similar for our rules in the private sector. So that's basically what the bill does. It allows that analysis. We will have to staff up a little bit with LSO. We have the smallest legislative branch in the country, and one of the largest executive branches. So I think that is warranted. And if the goal is protecting a $40 billion a year economy, it's okay to hire 2 employees at LSO to help ensure that the executive branch has a proper check on it when it's making rules that do impact the private sector. It also makes it clear that any legislator, not only will we receive this analysis, it'll be published publicly, so the public will have an understanding of what the economic impact of any agency rule, but it'll also make it very clear that any legislator can bring forward a legislative order which would in effect nullify the rule. And so that's the basic premise of the bill as it stands, Mr. Chairman. You'll see that it is engrossed. There has been a robust discussion going on between a few of us and in the executive branch. I think we're more or less in a good spot here with the bill as is, so I do have some amendments here to suggest to the committee. So, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay, I'll pause there with the conceptual discussion and see what the committee's pleasure is. Want to go through the bill line by line, or what's your pleasure, Mr. Chairman?
Are there any questions first from the committee? Representative Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for being here. I noticed that from when the bill first came out, there's a lot of different pages that aren't in here. What were kind of some of, just hitting some highlights of what changed from this original Senate file to now what's engrossed?
Right.
Senator Boner.
The biggest change is that in the original version, it required the affirmative action of the legislature to approve rules. If that did not happen, or if we did nothing, then the rules went away. So it flips the onus on us, as it is currently, to proactively do something. You have to go through 3 readings in each chamber, and no committees, but it goes directly to the chamber, and you have to pass a majority in each chamber in order for the rule to be nullified. The previous version, if we did nothing, then the rule would go away. So it's flipping the onus on us, which is the current process, and so that's the biggest difference. Originally, we also had, and I admit that this probably wasn't the best way of doing it, that we would, if there's an emergency rule, for example, we'd have to basically come into a special session. I don't think that's consistent with the citizen legislature. So that was one of the first amendments that we made. But that was a major policy choice, and all those pages went away based around that concept.
Follow up? No? Any other questions? I had a question because you do have several amendments. Do you want to read those in as you go here, and we'll just approve those as proposed one amendment? Or would you like to handle those separately?
Yeah, it's whatever the committee's pleasure is. We have 2 separate concepts, but if you approve them all, they'll be, I think, contained in the same standing committee amendments. So,
Okay.
Yeah, whatever you want, Mr. Chairman. So.
Yeah, go ahead and proceed, I guess, reading those in to the bill as you go.
Okay, so we have the first one. It is, the number is 204 at the top left-hand corner. And this reinserts does 2 things. It reinserts a concept that was originally in the bill that went away of distinguishing among different types of rules depending on their economic impact. So basically what this would do, would highlight what would be a major rule, and that definition is on the top of page 2 of the amendment. The biggest one being it has more than $100,000 worth of economic impact on the private sector. Then basically it'd be used as a way to help highlight the rules that have a major economic impact. And then there's some catch-alls too, that recognize that maybe thinking back to COVID, for example, you can have a rule for face masks, for example, that maybe doesn't have a huge economic impact, but it has a pretty significant societal impact. And so there's some catch-alls in there for, sub paragraphs 2 and 3 for that. And then also it makes it very clear that any legislator can enter in a legislative order directly to committee of the whole. It makes it very clear that doesn't have to be management council. Any legislator can do it. So that's the first one, two concepts there. And in talking with our staff, I think we can already do this. It's just not clear. Any legislator can, it's sort of a bill, but it just doesn't have to go through committee. We can probably do this already. This clarifies that. So that's the First Amendment, what it does. Then you also have 701. And this is really, I would argue, a lot of cleanup based off of direction or input from our legislative staff. We already have a chief economist apparently, so we don't want two of them. So it still would require, hiring somebody with an economics background to do the analysis, two of them. But we just want to make sure the job title is accurate, I guess, or not confusing, I should say. And then also another element within that amendment is basically directing management audit to do a review of the entirety of the process for rule review during the interim. I should have pointed out, sorry, Mr. Chairman, this has a July 1st, 2026 effective date. Once again, at the request of our staff to make sure that they have enough time to, get good quality people hired and to really assess the whatever else may need to be tweaked as we stand up this program. We do have a management audit committee that frankly, I used to be vice chairman of that committee not too long ago. It could probably be more robust. And we've, that used to be a significant function of the legislature that's really kind of gone by the wayside over the years. And so I think this is another way of taking a critical look at the way the executive branch does business in a way that is focused on protecting the private sector. And the Management Audit Committee would be a perfect committee to take on that responsibility. So that's the other part of the amendment.
All right, questions from the committee? Vice Chairman Locke.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I understand the process. So did the original, just a couple of questions. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm jumping the gun there. Thank you, Senator. Did the original fiscal note capture that 163,000? Did it capture this amendment that you're adding in where you're doing the specific? Did it capture those two positions? I assume it did.
Yes, that has remained unchanged.
Thank you.
Representative, follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then just in terms of the process, so you have if I understand it correctly, we've expanded it to where any of us can request this movie, and I guess this could be moved, we could move these into our process via a bill or something like that. But are we making this management committee review a more robust process with what we're doing here? Is that what we're attempting to do? Thank you.
Senator?
So the Management Audit Committee would simply have that role during the interim. That's why it's in Section 4. It's not really codified in the actual statute. We're just saying, it's kind of a belt and suspenders approach where you can always just ask Management Council to do the same thing, but we're putting it here in the bill to say during the next interim, let's have Management Audit take a look at this process and recommend any changes, because we still have the other current process would be kind of running concurrently with Management Council. So we have, separate processes that do slightly different things, but working along the same lines, I guess. So the idea would be to take a real good hard look and make sure that, is that unnecessary anymore? I would argue that it is necessary because it has a different function. That's why we left it alone in the bill. But it doesn't hurt to take a real deep dive look at it and during the interim. So that's all it does. It's basically saying you're going to do this during the interim.
Follow up? Okay, any other questions? Saw you had a confused look on your face for a second. So Representative Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, what do you envision the Management Council's role would be after the 26th session?
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that they would continue to do the same process they have where they are reviewing rules that are the result of legislation to ensure that the rules comply with legislative intent as well as the letter of the law. And so that's a different function than what this would do, which would provide an economic analysis and the regulatory impact all rules have, not just ones that are the result of immediately, recently passed legislation, but all rules. And so this process is much broader. And so that's the difference, but Management Council would continue with those current functions.
Thank you for the clarification.
Follow up? No? All right, any other questions? All right, thank you. Do we have anybody from an agency here to testify? Come on up. Go ahead and state your name for the record, and we'll hear your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Knapp, members of the committee. My name is Kit Wetland, Special Counsel, Tribal Relations Policy Advisor to Governor Gordon. Mr. Chairman, I'll try and be brief. I know you're short on time, but I'd like to run through just a couple points if that's okay with you.
Yes, go ahead.
First and foremost, to reiterate one of the previous comments, this bill has gone through a robust back and forth process. Zealous advocacy would probably be a good phrase to use for a lot of back and forth based on concerns for the executive branch to be able to actually efficiently get rules done while also recognizing the need for public input. I think that's part of the tug back and forth. So in front of you today, I'd like to say, after all of the back and forth on the bill that has gone through already, where there's been a lot of amendments, the governor's office can live with the bill that came out of the Senate as is, that original version. We believe that's a compromise that we can work with. In terms of changing it further, I'd just like to make a couple points, which are, for the rule process to work, people need to have finality and consistency of expectations. So they know what the rule is, if they need to challenge it, or if they need to comment on it during public comment, or they need to know when it's signed, and that's when we talk to somebody about filing a lawsuit to challenge it. Or when it's signed, and I've lined up my business to incorporate regulatory costs or the lack of regulatory burdens, because maybe the rule removed burdens. Running through the process real quick, I'll recognize right off the bat, rulemaking is a legislatively delegated authority to the executive branch. There's no question. Rules have the force and effect of law, and it's something that the legislature delegated to the executive branch for several reasons. Expertise, a lot of these when it comes to DEQ rules or YDOT rules, there's calculus equations, there's flow equations, because it has to do with methane emissions, in-stream flow, take your pick. The workload, there's a lot of work associated with getting those right and making sure you're consistent with federal statutes so that the state maintains primacy over areas like Clean Air Act permits or Clean Water Act permits, and you don't end up stuck with a BLM or a Department of Interior plan that has no local input. And then finally, efficiency. So you can move these through a process where they get done and people at least know where they can challenge and when and how. There is a process that was built in with checks and balances, recognizing that it was a delegated authority to the governor's office. And the checks and balances are there to make sure that the executive branch doesn't overstep. There's a notice period. They're required to notice on their website, agencies are, sometimes or public papers. I don't remember the exact details. If 25 people or more request, they have to do public meetings, which happens a lot, especially with Game and Fish or YDOT. Very intense rules that people interact with every day. Sometimes there's multiple community meetings in person around the state. And then there's a comment period that has to be at least 45 days. Many times for agency rules that are very, very complex, they go through multiple comment and response periods. Because afterwards, before we can sign, I review rules before the governor signs them, and I have to be able to represent to him. There's documentary evidence that the agency has substantively considered all the rules before them. They haven't just said, we'll think about it later. Nice suggestion, but we're too busy right now. We look for a specific reason. Either they accept the comment, they say thank you for the support, they make a change based on it, or they say no and here's the specific reason, not just we'll get to it later. At the end, there are some checks and balances there too, which previous commenters have alluded to. Right now, there are several ways where the legislature can challenge a rule that they disagree with. They say, you know what? It doesn't line up with our statutory intent. You didn't follow the Administrative Procedure Act, or you're out of line with your statutory authority. The first one is Management Council gets a legislative review from LSO. and it summarizes what the rule does in about a page, 2 pages, and says, and either recommends, yeah, this meets those 3 criteria, statutory authority, intent, procedure, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then it'll recommend to Management Council, you should recommend to the governor that he either rescind the rule, line item veto parts of it, or accept it. And if there's a rescission amendment or a veto, the governor at that point can say, I accept that and I'll make the change or I won't. We've gone through about 4 or 5 of those in the last couple of years. We've run the gamut from disagreeing with Management Council to agreeing to partially agreeing. At the end of that, if the Management Council is still not, and this is before the rule signed is in effect. Once the governor signs, if the Management Council disagrees, they can do what's called a legislative order, which is basically a bill in another name, where the legislature in both houses can vote to repeal the rule in its entirety. And there's another check from the legislature, which is a member can bring a bill and say, you know what, we want to change the statute. Just so there's no uncertainty. We'll change the statute to make sure you know what our intent was. That has happened. I believe that's happening this session with a couple of election laws. Aside from that, there's also several ways that citizens can participate. For comments, if citizens' comments aren't adequately considered, or if there's a procedural issue or authority issue, citizens by themselves can issue a challenge to a rule in court. They can file a petition to do that. They can also, throughout the year, file a petition to request that an agency amend or repeal a rule if they would like. So those are some of the checks and balances that exist already. That process, and I know that's already too long talking about it, it's already a complicated process with a lot of checks and balances and steps, but it works for the most part. No process is perfect, but at least you know by this date there will either be a signature that delegate authority is final, and then people know here are my remedies for how to challenge it, and they know if it gets challenged, it will likely be done at this point. And that creates that expectation. People can rely on knowing what the process will look like, and they don't have to worry that it'll change 6 months later if there's a random change that they couldn't expect. The governor believes this process works and that the tools we have for the legislature to challenge rules, if the legislature would choose to use those for a legislative order or bring a bill to change a statute, it's within their prerogative. It's what that process is there for. And it also reflects the balance of there's this delegated authority where the executive needs to be able to at least get these rules done so that we can know we're not going to lose primacy. People can know what their regulations are for recreating. There's several different regulatory schemes that people deal with every day, and it gives them consistency of expectations. That's where we get to the compromise in this bill. As the bill stands, as noted, it allows LSO to do these more in-depth economic analysis and provide those analyses to every legislature. The executive branch, the governor, has no concern with more legislators knowing more about the rules earlier and knowing more about what those effects are, so that if they need to flag for Management Council, hey, I know you guys are swamped with all of these rule packets, but this one affects my community and I've heard about it a lot. They can do that earlier rather than later. That's fine. That's how the process is built to work. It respects the division of labor and authority, and it is more efficient. We have nothing to hide. These rules go through a lot of public comment. There are probably rules that folks disagree with, no question, but every rule goes through at least a notice and comment process, except for, I believe, 2 agencies that the legislature is specifically exempted from comment through statute. Everything else has to go through at least a 45-day comment period. So at the end of the day, the bill before you is a compromise. Senator Boner already adequately represented the changes that have happened from the original version, a very vigorous back and forth. This is a compromise we can believe we live with that allows for legislators to know more what's going on with rules, but at the same time allows us to make sure agencies can keep state primacy over crucial things like water and air. Reduces the adding of more layers of bureaucracy where you have to watch several different lanes for the way a rule might change from an already admittedly complex process, and then avoids more bureaucracy, which is why at this point we understand the intent of the amendments proposed today. I don't have the documents in front of me to go line by line. I'm not here to disparage the intent, but we would encourage the committee to reject those amendments and approve the bill as engrossed from the Senate. We believe it accommodates the desire for more notice and information, but still allows the process to move. In terms of whether a rule is a major agency rule, if it's the same criteria that were in the original bill, I think it's $100,000 threshold, or there was significant social changes, and I forget the third significant societal impact. Those categories, it's hard to categorize what's a significant impact for a citizen, which means your categories will likely always end up being broad and will catch more rules than they will exclude. Which is another reason I'm not sure adding those will actually reduce significantly the same amount of rules that will be the big ones that will hit folks' desks. In terms of an individual legislator's ability to challenge a rule, whether it's a legislative order called that or a statutory change, any individual legislator right now could bring an individually sponsored bill to change a statute for a regulation they disagree with, whether that be DEQ, whether that be Game and Fish, whether that be Department of Agriculture. Lawmaking is the prerogative of the legislative branch, and an individual can already bring a bill to do that. It's just not a specific legislative order to repeal a specific rule. The concern about expanding that could be you end up with 20, 30, 40 legislative orders added to an already busy session calendar with other bills you're already considering. For the job title, I'm not here to quibble over somebody's job title. I haven't seen that language, so I don't want to make a die on a hill about that amendment. And in terms of management audit's ability to audit the rule process, I believe most of these committees through their interim topic process can already decide, we want to do a study on rules. We want to look at the process. LSO, we'd like to understand how this works. Governor's office, please come testify to us about how you review rules and handle your agencies. I believe that process exists. So with that, Mr. Chairman, apologies for going long, but that's where the governor's office is at on this bill, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions from the committee? So we're nearing time to get back to the floor. And this is a pretty important bill because it's got some amendments, and I'd like to hear from LSO as well. So we have one bill on Friday that we're doing. I'm going to leave the testimony open, and we'll cover this first on Friday. Senator Boner, is that okay with you to carry this over? I know your time is limited as well, but we got at least your testimony, and I'd like to do that for the committee's sake to understand this, and actually to have you look at the amendments that are made and specific, and to have some comment on that as well. So.
And Mr. Chairman, I was given some advance notice, so I knew they were coming. If I could see the paper version, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So that's what we'll do. We'll leave public comment open and move this to Friday. Is there anything further to come before the committee? Seeing not, we will adjourn. That's what I thought.